Good evening and welcome. We appreciate you being here. We welcome Mr. Jordan Cunningham, who is on the left, who is the incumbent for the seat, and to his right is the challenger, Mr. Bill Ostrander. So thank you both for again being here, and thank you for agreeing to the format for tonight's program. Just for those of you that are not aware of our format, or perhaps you forgot, I know I'm forgetting a lot these days, let me just take a few minutes to go over what the format is for tonight. Thank you. We have Marga Cooley, who is the timer, and Janet Blevins. They are in the front. They will be the timers. Each candidate initially will have 4 minutes to introduce yourself and explain why you are running. Then we will have the question period. Each of the candidates has received each of these 2 questions ahead of time to prepare. Each candidate will have 5 minutes to address each question. The first question will be addressed to Mr. Cunningham, and that is, what is the top challenge facing the constituents of the 35th Assembly District that needs to be addressed by the California Assembly, and what is your proposed solution? The second question is, in light of the ongoing drought and increased fire dangers, what changes do you propose to mitigate these issues? At that point, we'll break for a 15-minute intermission. You're going to be tired of sitting. You want to talk. So it's kind of twofold. You get up, roam, do whatever, but please come back. And then also, we are going to ask you to write down on cards that we're distributing any questions that you have. Lisa in the back has the cards. We only entertain written questions during the second part of the forum. So if you have a question, be sure and write it down. And then we go through and sort them to avoid duplication. Then we come back to the question and answer period. Then during this time, each candidate will be able to respond to each question. Although if you want to direct a question to a specific candidate, you may, but both will have the option to answer it, and each will have 2 minutes to respond to each question. Mr. Cunningham will answer the first question first. Mr. Ostrander will answer the second question first, so we'll alternate back and forth. And then for the conclusion, each candidate will have 2 minutes to present a concluding statement, beginning first with you, Mr. Ostrander. Okay, so you ready? Alrighty, so we will begin first of all with Mr. Cunningham taking this time to introduce yourself. 4 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for attending. This is a wonderful piece of democracy we're about to enjoy, so I hope you all have a good time and come away more educated than you came in about the 2 of us, and I'm hoping to convince you that I deserve another term in the State Assembly. I want to tell you a little bit about what we've been able to accomplish in my first 2-year term thus far. One of the things, I think we've done a great deal in the almost 2 years I've been in this office. One of the things I'm most proud of is we fought over the last 2 years, we fought and built a coalition to save career technical education, which in my day was called vocational ed. These are your practical classes that prepare kids for a career track in the skilled trades and early childhood education across a number of different areas that are critical to our economic growth. The funding program in the state level was about to be cut from $300 million a year dedicated for high school level career technical education to $0 when I got elected to office. I worked in a bipartisan way with the chair of the Assembly Education Committee, Mr. Patrick O'Donnell from Long Beach. He is a former teacher, was backed by the California Teachers Association as I was in both my race in 2016 and this race. And we worked to build a huge coalition across industry, across education, and in Sacramento, and convinced ultimately the people that make the state budget and the governor that we should permanently fund career technical ed. For starters, at $300 million a year, but I think we can build up from there. We are about to see in the next 5 years the largest retirement out of the skilled trades in the history of the United States of America. There is tremendous opportunity for kids that are interested in plumbing, in welding, becoming electricians, carpentry, We're building again in our country and our state, and that is a wonderful thing. And that's going to create serious opportunity for kids, and we need to be preparing them through these early classes that expose them. I've led in the state assembly to fight what I believe is one of the moral issues of our time, and that's human trafficking. It is the fastest growing criminal enterprise in the world, and it's taking place up and down Highway 101 under all our noses, in our hotels and massage parlors, motels, you name it. And we need to give law enforcement the tools they need to go after this aggressively. We need to protect victims. I carried a bill that's sitting on the governor's desk right now that would give a 10-year protective order, the longest you're allowed under law, to a victim of labor trafficking. Right now, they only qualify for a 3-year order. That means the people that traffic and abuse them can come right out of prison after serving their sentence, go back and take that person back and get them in their clutches again. We need to fight to protect victims, and we need to go after the supply and the demand side of this problem. I think it is a moral issue of incredible importance. I'm a former prosecutor. I'm a former criminal defense attorney. So I know a little bit about how these things work in the courtroom and how important it is that you are funding programs that build rapport with those victims so they have the courage to testify against their abusers. Those are two areas that I'm incredibly proud of what we've been able to accomplish so far. I've tried to be a common sense voice for public safety, a voice for public education. I'm a strong supporter of our public schools. I'm a public school product, born and raised in the Tascadero area, Tascadero High School product. And in addition to public safety, education, and the last thing I'll mention, because I got 15 seconds, my very first bill signed into law in 2017 created a small business liaison in every state agency that regulates small business to try to enforce some government accountability and give small business a voice, because I think we've got to support our small businesses to have job growth for the next generation. Thank you.
Good afternoon, and thank you for coming. It's very pleasing to see a room full of people. I want to thank the League of Women Voters, and I also want to thank my opponent, Mr. Cunningham, for coming down here today, and also for your service for the last year and a half. We appreciate what you're doing. This is not an easy job, and I know he travels a long way to miss his family every week. I have no intention of disparaging you, Mr. Cunningham. I hope that we can have a terrific debate and a terrific campaign. I have a lot of respect for you. I have a lot of respect for you personally, but I do want to take issue with some of your voting record, if I may. So I would like to compliment you on your career and vocational education interest, because that's also something of mine. It's also something that I graduated from. It's something that my son has taken advantage of in San Luis Obispo High School. He took 5th in the state in the Skills USA competition, and today he is actually a second-level mechanic at a local business, earning head of household living, earning overtime pay, paid vacation, and health insurance, dental insurance, and vision insurance. So I'm very proud of him. But I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I live in San Luis Obispo. I farm, and I have 2 nonprofits. One of my nonprofits is set up to get money out of politics. How many of you think that there's too much money in politics today? Unfortunately, it's true, and I'm glad that he agrees with that. My other nonprofit is to create community service programs for high school students, because from my point of view, and the data shows us, that students who engage in in community service programs, the younger they start, the more active they are throughout their lives, the more committed they are to their communities, the broader their range of experience, and they typically show that they actually earn more money over our lifetimes. It's a very important issue for me. As I've told you, that I'm a big fan of getting money out of politics. On that order, I've written a bill for the House of Representatives. Sorry, it's very hot in here. I hope you don't mind if I took my coat off. I'm a little informal. I wrote a bill for the House of Representatives called the Corporate Political Disclosure Act of 2018 that Mr. Carball introduced on May the 1st. I've written a bill for the City of San Luis Obispo on publicly funded elections, and I think it's incredibly important. Money is having a pernicious effect on our politics, because corporations can afford to donate $8,800 where most people in this room cannot. I wasn't really interested in running for this office, to be honest with you. I decided to after a number of people came up to me and asked me to run based on my experience in advocating for campaign finance reform, writing legislation, etc. And eventually I decided, well, I'm going to look into Mr. Cunningham's record, and I want to see. So what I found, and what I was disappointed to learn, was that Mr. Cunningham voted against SB 100, which gets California on 100% renewable energy by 2045. And then he voted against bail reform. And then he voted against SB 3, which created a $4 billion bond measure to help affordable housing. And then he voted against a bill that would eliminate life sentences for children found guilty of a crime and given a life sentence, even after 25 years. And I thought that's a terrible thing to throw a life away. And he voted against sanctuary status. And he voted against protecting legal cannabis users from the federal government. And he voted against a bill that prohibits the conversion of advertising for conversion therapy for homosexuality. And that bothered me. And so I decided that I would run because I don't believe in those visions. From my point of view, government is about helping us to lift ourselves up, not try to keep us down. And from my point of view, I think we can do better. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we will begin our questions. I will reiterate the first question again, and Mr. Cunningham, we ask that you address it first, and you will each have 5 minutes to respond. The first question is, what is the top challenge facing the constituents of the 35th Assembly District that needs to be addressed by the California Assembly, and what is your proposed solution? Mr. Cunningham?
Thank you. So that was a question we got ahead of time, and I'm glad for it because it's hard to narrow it down to one challenge because I think we actually have a number of things, including the impending closure of the Diablo Canyon nuclear power plant, which is going to take 10% of our state's energy, 10% of our entire statewide portfolio, carbon-free, which is produced at that single plant, and it's coming offline in 2025. I think we are going to see an enormous economic hit because of that, potentially, if we're not intelligent about how we mitigate that. If I had to answer the question, though, with just one simple issue, I would say it's the issue of affordability. And that's something that is up and down the state of California, but it hits us particularly hard here. This is, I truly believe, one of the reasons my wife and I moved back here to raise our 4 kids was it is the best place to raise a family, I think, in the United States. But it is not cheap. And it's getting more expensive. And your state government, I'm here to tell you, is doing some things that make it even harder to raise a family here, harder to retire here, harder to live here on a fixed income. And you see it in a number of ways. My opponent mentioned SB 100. That's the bill that would mandate 100% renewable energy portfolio. Look, I am a pro-clean energy vote generally in the Assembly. But I think you ought to put nuclear power in there. You ought to put hydropower in there. The entirety of Washington State runs on hydropower. That's clean. That's not emitting carbon. I crossed party lines to support the cap-and-trade extension. I was one of only 7 Republicans to do that. So it's not that I don't support clean power, but you've got to weigh cost-benefit when you're talking about a government mandate that has no science behind it as to whether we know that that can be achieved without an economic hit and without driving electricity prices of all of your bills through the roof. And I tell you, there was no study. There was no study showing that SB 100 was economically feasible. So I can't in good conscience say all of you should pay more for your electricity because Kevin De Leon wrote a bill called SB 100 and says that we should have 100% renewable as they define it and picked a year out of a hat. I mean, that's just not good policy. That's not what you all, I believe, elected me to go do. I voted against the gas tax. It's a tough one. We need infrastructure spending. Guess what? You're being asked to pay for the same thing twice. You've been sending money to Sacramento to pay for road and infrastructure maintenance. I've been doing it. We've all been doing it for decades. And they're not good stewards of the money. They take it, they put it in the general fund, even though the voters have said numerous times by initiative after initiative, no, our gas tax money, our vehicle fee money should go directly and only to maintenance and to upgrade on our roads and highways and transit infrastructure. The state government's not keeping faith with that. And then they're asking you to pay more. I mean, that bill alone hits the average family. It's $780 a year. $780 a year, that's the average family. you own a small business, it's thousands. If you have a big family, it's over 1,000. And that's before you factor in the inflationary effects, because everything you buy at the grocery store for your family just went up too, because diesel's up 20 cents more. And there was no structural reform in that bill to make sure that the state government's keeping faith with what it should promise and keep faith to you with. There's nothing in there saying we're going to protect this money and not rate it and use it in the general fund for other purposes. So I think affordability's got a number of aspects. I think one thing that would be helpful, my opponent raised the SB3 housing bond. Look, I asked the same question when I was getting lobbied for that bill. I asked everybody the same question. Can you show me where San Luis Obispo and Santa Barbara counties benefit from this? Because I got the cost figured out. I figured out the cost because all of my constituents have to pay for additional taxes to service those bonds. That I know. So show me where that money's going to come back into my community. And I never got an answer from anybody on that. So one thing I think that we can do to help with the affordability issue is stop passing laws that raise the price of everything. Stop passing laws that raise the price of your electricity, the price of your gas, the price of your food, the price of college. And as far as housing affordability, which is probably among the biggest culprits in this equation, we got to build. We got to build smartly. I'm not saying we should make the Central Coast look like Orange County, but we have to add some supply. I mean, the economists estimate we have 1.8 million units short of what we need for our present population. We're just not building, and there's a lot of laws that are standing in the way of us catching supply up with demand in our housing market, and it's really hurting people. Thank you. My time's up.
Well, first of all, I would like to ask a question here in the room, because we heard Mr. Cunningham say that human trafficking is the moral issue of our time. So I would like to see a show of hands from all of you here today of who is for human trafficking. No one. How about that? Now let's see a show of hands of people who think we need to do better with health care. Now let's show a show of hands of people who think that we're not doing enough for health care. How many people think we need to have affordable housing, as Mr. Cunningham says? How many people think we need to get money out of politics? Mr. Cunningham, these are the moral issues of our time. And I respect that you're working hard on an issue that you find important, but to me that's tone deaf. That's tone deaf of what Californians want. And I also want to take umbrage slightly with your characterization that you might be an environmental candidate. And I would like to read off for the audience here some of his sponsors or his contributors. Western Propane Gas Association, Sempra Energy, Monsanto, BP, Tesoro Companies, California Resources Corporation, Exxon Mobil, PG&E, Edison International, Phillips 66, et cetera, which leads me to the moral issue of our time, which is democracy is broken. And the reason that it's broken is we have this flood of money into our campaigns. And he's doing everything legally. I don't take issue with him on this. But 91.5% of his money is coming from corporations and political action committees. So when you're driving down the road seeing these big ranch signs, just remember that 9 out of 10 of those are being paid for by the Koch brothers, by Monsanto, by Philip Morris cigarettes, by companies that we don't necessarily think are great contributors or citizens of our community. Now, I've written a lot of bills and a lot of stuff on public financing of elections and about getting money out of politics. Because you see, what it does, even if it doesn't influence our representatives in an actual quid pro quo way, it alters who we put up for election to begin with, because most of us don't want to sit around begging for money. And there's a conflict of interest when people who are running for public office must seek private donations. And corporations build into the framework of their business to be able to contribute to candidates. In my particular race, and again, I respect Mr. Cunningham, but his average contribution is $2,300, and most of that is from corporations. They're outside of our district. In contrast, I have twice as many individual contributions from people like you, The only exception is that I have a couple of unions who've contributed to me, who are comprised of people who are trying to push back when the Janus decision makes it even more difficult to belong to a collective bargaining organization. We must get money out of politics because it taints the entire system. And even if the person who is our representative makes every decision independently, it undermines the faith of our constituency because there is the appearance of corruption. How many of you have heard somebody say or said yourself, throw the bums out? How many of you have heard them say, he's a politician, you can't trust him? Now, I'm sure Mr. Cunningham is a very honorable guy. But when he talks about pushing back against SB 100, which is trying to get California onto 100% renewable energy, which is almost 30 years away from us, and lots of technology is going to change, and he says he can't figure out why we should pay that extra money, I'm sorry, but it leads me to believe maybe he's being influenced by the Koch brothers and by Phillips 66 and Chevron and Mobil and Exxon, etc. And maybe he's not. But it undermines our faith in our institutions of government. The problem is that each of us is imbued with a sense of gratitude. And when I must go out and raise money, if any of you here, if I were to give you $100, you'd think better of me. You would. What do you think we candidates feel when somebody gives us money? We feel gratitude because you're helping us. And that gratitude is what leads to influence and the willingness to hear the rhetoric of somebody who wants something on the other end. Mick Mulvaney, who was the federal budget director, said a couple of months ago in the New York Times, when I was in Congress, there was a hierarchy. If somebody wanted to talk to me and they hadn't given me money, I don't speak to them. If they had given me money, I might speak to them. I'm here to tell you, our democracy needs a serious reconsideration of money in politics and have public financing of elections. Thank you.
Thank you. We neglected to announce tonight that we are fortunate to have a translator into Spanish tonight again, Yvette Peralta. Yvette, you want to raise your hand? Okay, so please avail yourself. Thank you. Thank you again, Yvette. Okay, our second question, and we will begin with you, Mr. Ostrander. Did you catch your breath?
My mouth is really dry. Can I get some more water really quick?
Yes.
Thank you. Bipartisanship, everybody.
Yay. Okay. At its best. Alrighty. Again, each of you has 5 minutes to address this question, and that question is, in light of the ongoing drought and increased fire dangers, what changes do you propose to mitigate these issues?
Thank you. It's rather amazing how fires can be both so life-giving and life-threatening at the same time. And of course, that's the conundrum that we must live with fires in California. Oh, sorry. Can you hear that now? Yeah. All right, thank you. There was an interesting article that state reporter Dan Krieger, I think it's Krieger, is his name Dan Krieger? It's in the Santa Maria Times just yesterday, talking about how this was the most progressive session of legislature that we've had in a long, long time. And I think it's terrific, some of the bills they passed. One of them, I think all of you can be quite proud of your representative, State Senator Hannah Beth Jackson, because she wrote and passed a bill, which I'm pleased to know that Mr. Cunningham voted for, called SB 1260, which is a bill that intends to help with prescribed burns across the state. So let's talk about what the issue is, because the issue specifically has to do with the intensity of the fires and how much they burn and where they go. So it's important to understand that one of the reasons, I mean, fires are part of our natural ecosystem, but one of the reasons that they're so intense right now is because the Forest Service took a position about 100 years ago to suppress all fires. And for years, fires would go through a forest or a wildland area, and sometimes they were even started by our Native Americans. And they might go through as often as every 5 years in some cases. And when they do, they would burn all the debris that's laying on the forest floor. So without burning, there's been this enormous gathering of flammable materials. And so what we're having right now is when these fires happen, they're so loaded, they get super hot, which means they can burn even more things where they might not have had a chance to before. The other reason is climate change. Droughts and warming temperatures have extended the official fire season by 30 days before and 30 days afterwards. And drought has caused the death of 127 million trees in the state. And when those trees die, they're standing there, and firemen describe those as ladders. When a tree is dead and that debris on the bottom it catches on fire and it starts to leap up, it can catch dead trees, which then burn up like that. And where a fire might go through and stay below the canopy in a normal, healthy forest, it then travels all the way up and catches the canopy of the forest, and now you've got real trouble. The other thing that happens as a result of global warming is that rising temperatures have increased wind speed, and this fans the flames and it moves embers often distances that can be very hard to control. And the third thing that we have a problem with is more homes are built in high-risk areas known as the wildlands-urban interface. And one of the things that does is we need to have more defensible zones around there, because when a house catches on fire, that takes our talent, our firefighting talent, away from the forest, because now they have to focus on one small structure. It really stretches resources and costs a lot more to repair. So there are a bunch of solutions, and these are some of the things that Hannah Beth Jackson included in her bill, and that was we need to train more fire crews and conduct more prescribed burns to minimize forest debris. We need to do more mitigation in high-risk areas, such as removing dead trees, clearing defensible spaces, and utilizing vegetation management practice, such as using goats to go in and clean areas. This would include timber harvest permits. We need to give grants to private property owners to manage their wildlands where appropriate and have strong enforcement of defensive zones. And with defensive zones, most of you who are real property owners know that there's about 100, 150-foot clearance around structures. And then finally, we need clear and sensible building codes so that fire-resistant materials for homes in high-risk areas don't catch on fire. There's a lot of new materials out there and plenty of stories where homes that are built with fire-resistant materials survive raging fires from San Diego all the way north. And also another thing that's happened in this last legislature is Governor Brown signed an executive order to augment state spending through cap and trade funding. And he added 6 additional fire crews to do the prescribed burns, and he doubled the number of acres, mitigated acres, to 500,000 to help clean up some of those trees and the debris that creates these hot fires. And I think that we might also need to look at reducing power loads when it's possible, where it's possible, because one of the top 3 causes for fire is the transmission lines of our power companies. And I know I only have a short time, so let me finish with something. It may seem contradictory, but we actually need to plant more trees. One of the reasons for this that most people don't understand is that forests serve as a biotic pump. A biotic pump is where trees that are evapotranspirating are basically sweating. And it's creating the effect of a swamp cooler, causing cool air. That cool air creates a vacuum in the atmosphere and draws in ocean moisture and condensed moisture from other areas from as far away as thousands of miles and brings more rainfall. And we need more rainfall in California. I wish I could go on about that. Thank you.
Thank you. I think there's 3 major components to a successful fire strategy. The first, probably most important thing is that we've got to be proactive. I agree with him on this point. We've got to be proactive about clearing out dead trees and vegetation. Because of the droughts, because of the streak of hot years, we have 129 million dead trees in California forests. That's the most in history since they started recording it. I have no idea how they come up with these numbers, but I have it on good authority. 129 million dead trees. That's a lot of kindling, right? And with heat, and it doesn't take a whole lot to have fires, and we're seeing fires, the devastation of these things. We had the Alamo fire, the Thomas fire, we had the Whittier fire here in the district. The Northern California fires are unbelievable devastation. The loss right now to property alone for the Napa fire is estimated to be $7 billion. I mean, that's incredible. And I mean, the loss of life is tragic. So I've been part of a group that's been working on this in the Assembly. We negotiated some funds. One thing that you always run into whenever you're trying to say, okay, it's one thing to have a great idea, let's be proactive, let's clear out dead trees and be more intelligent about managing our vegetation. But then how do you pay for it? And so some of us, when we were in the cap and trade negotiation, we said, look, you can prove as a scientific fact that one of these massive forest fires dumps as much carbon in the air as all of us driving automobiles in the entirety of the state of California for a year. I mean, these are massive. So what's the best bang for our buck if we're looking to reduce carbon emission and protect property and protect life is to dedicate a dedicated funding source to going in and paying for clearing out dead trees and such. So I'm proud to say that's something that this legislature has been doing over the last 2 years in a bipartisan manner. And right now we have $200 million a year for the next 5 years out of the greenhouse gas auction fund is going to proactively managing our forests and vegetation. I think that's a big win. I think it'll make a big difference. The second component, I think, to a successful strategy is supporting our firefighters. I've been endorsed, just recently announced this year as well as 2016 by the California Professional Firefighters. And I'm really proud of that. I mean, a lot of my friends, some of my best friends in the world are firefighters. These people, you know, they retire. The cancer rate for firefighters is unbelievably high. I mean, they risk their lives for us. They run towards the danger while we run to safety. And in a lot of ways, we got to be there for them. And that's supporting them with equipment, and that's supporting them, you know, with fair pay and a successful or a comprehensive retirement package. I think having more resources devoted to fire so that we've got people on hand when these fires kick up to respond quicker and more effectively is a tremendous and very wonderful investment of public dollars. The last thing on the drought piece is, look, we've got to be masters of our own destiny on the Central Coast and water. I mean, the only thing holding us back as a region, I think, is figuring out the puzzle of the water supply, because we've got tremendous agricultural needs. We've got the normal demand for housing and for people to live their lives. It's a precious resource, and it's really hard to make more of. I think there's a lot of components to that. I like pursuing ocean water desalination and brackish water desalination. That technology has wonderful potential. There's a desal plant I toured at Diablo Canyon. Once Diablo gets decommissioned for the power plant side, they don't have any intended use for a desal water plant that they have there. Why aren't we hooking that up with a short pipeline to Lopez Lake, recharging the lake and the aquifers? I mean, there's some very simple things that wouldn't cost a whole lot of dollars. It would cost a lot for you and I, but I mean, it wouldn't cost a whole lot of dollars, and the state and the locals and private companies could partner up and really do a lot of good for our water supply. My office has helped 4 different localities so far. It's Paso Robles City, Templeton Community Services District, City of San Luis Obispo, City of Pismo Beach, get Prop 1 water bond financing for wastewater treatment plants. That's another thing. We got to recycle more. I mean, a lot of wastewater, you don't have to treat it to the same level to make it drinkable. You can use it for agriculture use much more cheaply. So those projects are breaking ground, and I'm really proud of that. That's something we need to do more of. If we can be masters of our own destiny for water supply on the Central Coast, the sky is the limit for us economically. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, now we've reached the part in the evening where we're going to take about a 15-minute break. Hopefully you have written out some questions that we can entertain during the break. Raise your hand if you have written questions, and also raise your hand. Let us know if you want a card to write a question on. Thank you. All right, as we mentioned earlier, we will alternate with who begins first, and each candidate will have 2 minutes, or no. Yes, each candidate will have 2 minutes to respond to each question. Thank you to all of you who submitted questions. We had a problem, and it's a nice problem to have. We had too many questions for our time period. So hopefully yours was addressed. If not, feel free to come up afterwards and speak with Mr. Cunningham or Mr. Ostrander if yours was not addressed. Okay? Thank you. All righty. Again, 2 minutes. We will begin with you, Mr. Ostrander, first, and I'll repeat the question twice. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. Do you support single-payer health care? Do you support single-payer health care?
I do. Thank you very much for that question. 62% of Californians believe that we need to have a Medicare for all system. It is the ethical thing to do. It is not just doctors that should have an ethical commitment to one another or to their patients. I believe that we need an ethical commitment to one another as well, a Hippocratic oath to one another. And if you don't believe in the ethics of it, you can look at the economics of it. Even the Koch brothers report came out and say that it would save the average person money on medical care. It would save small business 22%. Right now, 70% of our health care is already paid for by public dollars. There is a way to get to that number that we need to be able to pay for it. SB 562 was a bill that Speaker Rendon did not feel was fully complete, and therefore it was tabled. That was unfortunate to me because I believe that there should have been further deliberations, even if it wasn't a perfect bill, in an attempt to make it a perfect bill or an attempt to sort out the problems. We're not there yet, but we're trying and we're getting closer to that, and I absolutely believe it's the right thing to do. If we have to increase taxes by 2.3% or increase the sales tax or something to make up that difference, at the end of the day, what we want people to look at is, are you spending more money every month? It is the moral issue of our time that people, 3 to 4 million Californians, do not have access to health care. One of my friends, who's a conservative, who I love very much, has a blood malady, and he's pushed back against health care for a long time. And now he has a blood malady, and his pills cost him $13,000 a piece, which he's supposed to pay every month out of his pocket. Well, not all of it. His insurance covers some of it. SB 562 is the right thing to do. We should have had this 8 years ago in the federal government, but we didn't. And one of the reasons we didn't is we had Big Pharma and medical association and insurance company profiteers of our healthcare system pushing back and not allowing for a public option. Americans everywhere agree that medical care is too expensive and not spread around to everyone. We have a two-tiered system in this country, and we can change that, and we must. Thank you.
So as to the question of whether I support single-payer health care as envisioned by SB 562, the answer is no. And the reason is that bill was scored by the Senate committee that it went to determine how much it would cost. SB 562, the single-payer health care bill that my opponent's talking about, was scored at costing $400 billion a year. That's billion with a B. The entirety of the state government in California is about $140 billion. So it would be over double the entire budget of the state government. The proponents of SB 562 never put forward a plan of how they were going to pay for a $400 billion a year program. Some of the things they floated were changing Prop 13 / eliminating protections of Prop 13, a payroll tax of 15% on top of existing taxes for both employers and employees. If you're worried about retaining business in California right now so that our kids, my kids, your grandkids have job opportunities in the next generation, the last thing you want to do is raise taxes by another 15% on both employers and employees in our state. Another proposal would have increased income taxes on the middle class by 20%. I mean, it's enormously expensive. That's an enormous, enormous expense. And I'm not sure you get good quality care out of it. Look at the DMV. We've had issues right now with the DMV. I'm sure some of you have read the stories. The DMV processes things. They process licenses. They process renewals and car registration. They can't do that right. I mean, we gave them 100% of the budget ask, and there's lines 4 hours long for people that have appointments at the DMV. So if we have trouble with the state agency executing a system as simple as that, why do we want to put the state in charge of all of our healthcare decisions? I don't think you're going to get good care. The issue that's critical to the Central Coast, by the way, for healthcare, from what I've studied, what I've seen, what my constituents have told me, is access to quality care, bringing in quality professionals and specialists, and we need to do that. We need to do that absolutely. But single-payer healthcare is just going to cost. It's unaffordable, and the quality of care is going to decline.
Because this is such an important question, is there a chance that we can rebut this for a moment? Just because it's a very important issue for all of us, I think. How do you feel?
Okay, then what we will do, each of you will be allowed 1 minute to respond. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. This is an important issue for us, so I think it's really important because this, in some characteristics, defines the difference between Mr. Cunningham and myself. SB 562 was not a perfect bill. That doesn't mean that you kill it and stop talking about it and figuring out a way to do it. Secondly, the estimate for the cost of health care in this country did not, and they were not allowed to consider the savings that would occur if we had single payer. The problem with healthcare in America today is it's run by profiteers who have small little areas and regions in which they bargain for. It is not the collective bargaining of 40 million people. And that is what's so important about it. And unfortunately, his emphasis is all about taxes. And I've not seen a bill that said it was going to raise taxes 15%. The studies that I've shown seen 2.3% payroll tax, which is on top of the 1.49% that people are already paying for Social Security. For Medicare. And how many seniors out there appreciate your Medicare? That's a federal program much larger than California, and somehow we manage to do that just fine. So the question, Mr. Cunningham, is not about whether or not it costs us a little more today. The question is, what does it cost us at the end of the month or the end of the year? And that, as every study has shown, is a savings to us.
Yeah, that's just factually false. The studies that, and I looked into this issue in great detail. There is no way you pay for a $400 billion new program in California with a 2.3% tax increase. That makes no sense. There's no possible way. By the way, to get $400 billion, the proponents, and I met with in my office some of the proponents for SB 562. We had a great meeting, exchanged ideas. I listened to everything they had to say. I went back and read their PowerPoints. And they assume you can get $200 billion of the $400 billion you need by getting the federal government to give us waivers to opt out of Medicare. There's no way that's going to happen. And so we're going to end up double taxed. I mean, if he had his way and he got up there and voted for this bill and it became enacted, if they could figure out how to pay for it, we would just all pay Medicare payroll taxes, and then we would also pay the additional taxes for the California single payer system. And by the way, if you've ever tried to get a specialist in this area, I mean, you got to drive a long ways. It's a 2-hour drive sometimes for people with pediatric special needs. We need to bring those folks closer to here. I submit to you that's probably the #1 challenge for healthcare in our area.
Thank you. We'll change topics now. And Mr. Cunningham, we ask that you address this first. According to the California Farm Bureau, 69% of California farmers are suffering a labor shortage. According to the Santa Barbara Growers Shippers Association, $13 million in crops rotted in the field in Santa Barbara County in 2017 without enough labor. Specifically, what will you do to address this problem? How will you attract labor for agriculture?
So there are certain things you can do on the state level. Before I got to the legislature in 2016 and 2015, they passed a bill called the Ag Overtime Bill. And on its surface, it sounded like a decent thing. Pay people, if you have them work over 40 hours a week in agriculture, you have to pay them overtime or time and a half. The problem with that approach is that it's seasonal labor. You can stack up a lot of hours and earn a lot of money during harvest, but then there are parts and times of the year that you don't have the opportunity to make as much. So a lot of the folks doing that work actually wanted the ability to work as much as they possibly could, and a lot of employers were saying, well, look, this overtime bill makes me, now I have to do swing shifts. Instead of having one crew that works 50 hours a week, I have 2 crews that work 25 hours each, because that's the only way I can afford to have my harvest done. So a lot of things Sacramento does in the name of trying to help a group of people, which is a worthy endeavor, it actually has the opposite of the intended effect. And that was one such example. So on the federal level, which I don't serve in federal office, but if you were asking me just in the abstract, what's the fastest thing you could do to cure an agriculture labor shortage, I would say take the guest worker visa program and grow it to whatever size you need to meet the demand. We could probably make that program could probably be 10 million spots, and we would probably be able to fill those spots. And then you've got people in the system, they're here. If they do something illegal or commit felonies, you know that. You make sure they're paid fairly, make sure they're treated fairly. I don't think it's a good system that we have now in a lot of respects, where people are sort of half in the shadows and half not. We've got big demands for labor, and I think we should have a federal guest worker visa program that is sufficiently large to meet that demand. But again, that's a federal issue, and there's I just don't have any power to change that in the state assembly.
Thank you for that question. I think it's a very appropriate question given that we're here in Santa Maria where 1 out of 5 jobs here is related to agriculture. And I happen to be a farmer. And my family has used migrant labor going back to the 40s and 50s. Not necessarily here, but in Michigan and Indiana. Those are some of the hardest working people I've ever met. And secondly, I think it's very important that we understand that in the United States we have a cheap food policy. A cheap food policy means we don't want to pay a lot for our foods. Unfortunately, what that means is we get an awful lot of manufactured foods that aren't even good for our health. And secondly, right now we're in an atmosphere which I blame in many respects the federal government, but those people who participate in those kinds of attitudes that the federal government is putting on right now about immigration make it exceedingly difficult and challenging. And it makes it difficult to find solutions. The H-2B visa program for migrant farm workers is too complicated and too much paperwork. And I agree with Mr. Cunningham that that's something that is at the federal level they need to change. But I disagree with him from the point of view that he voted against a sanctuary status here in California. He's voted against situations which I think would empower people who are simply trying to make a living. And I don't know about any of you, but those people are the most underpaid people in the United States. Any of us, none of us, I should say, could stand bending over and cutting cilantro off an inch off the ground, or bend over and pick strawberries for 8 hours a day. Those people deserve dignity and our gratitude because they make our food affordable and they pick our food and do our agricultural labor because most of us don't want to. And the risk that they take, the largest incidence of stomach cancer of any occupation in the United States today. So if we have to push a little bit to get them overtime pay for the hard work that they're doing and provide some housing for them, I, for one, as a food eater, as a consumer, agree with that and vote yes. Who's with me on that?
Our next question. Do you support fracking? Why or why not? Do you support fracking? Why or why not?
I think that question is for me to start, right?
Yes.
All right. No, I am not for fracking. Fracking has been used for a long time. We all get it. We all seen that fossil fuels have been more easily obtained because of the consequences of fracking. I think it's a nice coincidence to point out that Mr. Hinkie over here, who works for Mr. Cunningham, is leading the No on Measure G campaign in San Luis Obispo County, which has to do with banning new oil wells in San Luis Obispo County. Fracking can be dangerous. In places like Oklahoma and Pennsylvania, we've seen a 400% increase in seismic activity. We've also seen that there's a lot of waste and wastewater. Sometimes you do it through steam injection. In our particular area, the Rio Grande oil fields, they're using 1 million gallons of water a day, 19 gallons to produce 1 gallon of very dirty crude oil, some of the dirtiest crude oil on the planet. We ship it up to San Francisco and sell it on the international market. The United States is now a net exporter of petroleum products. This is a 20th century, if not 19th century energy technology, and we need to move beyond that. Continuing to invest in fracking, continuing to invest in fossil fuels is a problem for us in the long run. We need to make that commitment to get to alternative energies. And again, I accept his reasons for voting against SB 100, but I have found that when you try, as an American, to do something, a very difficult task, like getting to space in the 1960s, which my father was one of the engineers on, with nothing but a slide rule and a pocket holder like that, and we managed to put a man on the moon, we can do things like that. We can do this. We can get to renewable energies, and the faster we wean ourselves off of that and stop this damaging, environmentally destructive technologies and move to that renewable energy, we'd all be healthier. We'd have less carbon in the atmosphere, and we'd switch to fuels which are cleaner, and we wouldn't have so many kids next to freeways with asthma. And we wouldn't have so much pollution in the ground that's heating us up and helping us to create these wildfires we talked about earlier. No, I don't agree with fracking. I understand we're on fossil fuels, but we must wean ourselves from them. Thank you.
So I just wanted to clarify one thing at the outset. I don't have any employees on the No on Measure G campaign. I don't know where that is coming from. I do think it's important to understand when you're looking at both the Measure P campaign in Santa Barbara County, which a lot of you in this room probably remember quite well from TV ads that I understand were running constantly for a couple years ago, and the San Luis Obispo version of that is going to be on the ballot this year, Measure G. I think you have to be careful to analyze this to see whether the campaign is actually doing what it's saying it wants to do. It's one thing to say we want to ban fracking. Fracking's sort of a bad word. There's some negative associations with that. I've been told by people in the industry that fracking is not being done on the Central Coast. That's not something that is needed to be done here on the Central Coast. And what these campaigns are more geared at is sort of a backdoor shutdown of the energy industry as a whole. Now, read the measures carefully if you live in San Luis County. Most of you probably don't, but I mean, I think you got to study it very carefully to see whether you're getting what you're told you're getting with that. Because, look, the energy industry employs a lot of people. I fully suspect and hope that by certainly 2060, we're going to be mostly driving electric vehicles. We still have to produce and generate the electricity and install charging infrastructure and redo all our highways. And there are a lot of things that have to be built up that we don't currently have, and that's going to take time. It's going to take money. You also need an affordable electric vehicle. Man, I like Elon Musk. I read a biography about him. I think he's a fascinating guy, and I sure would like to drive a Tesla. I think they're pretty cool. I can't afford one. I mean, we got to take time for the technology to come down to the point where it's affordable. You get a range of 300 miles with an electric vehicle, a minivan, so people can put kids in it, that costs, $30,000, $35,000. I think when we're at that point technologically, you're going to see the market take over and you're going to see some change. But we still have to generate the power, and in the meantime, we've got an industry that is actually one of the foundational bedrock industries of the North County economy, and that's energy, and I don't think we want to drive all those jobs out tomorrow.
Can we have another chance to respond, please? No, I've already answered. I want to be fair, but if it's possible, I also think this is a very important issue. I'll give you 30 seconds. How about that? Mr. Cunningham, am I wrong or right that that gentleman over there used to work for you as your communications director? Okay, so I wasn't lying. I wasn't making that up, but I think that's important. And he's here today, and I respect the fact this is America, and we all have differences of opinion. He has the right to do that. I went over and said hello to him earlier, and I'm sure he's a fine man. But I wanted to point that out because I think it's important. I also think it's important that there's a lot of deception around this issue. Fracking is not what's being done in San Luis Obispo County. I know that. The question was, do you believe in fracking? And so I answered that. What they're talking about is a steam injection process, and what we're concerned about is polluting the water, the underground aquifers. That's what's so concerning to us.
Okay, so if we're in agreement that fracking's not being done on the Central Coast, then I think that answers the question. Whether I support it in North Dakota or something, what does that matter? The fact is we need an energy policy that's realistic, that balances appropriately over time. The transition I think we're going to see towards alternative energy, towards electrification, but does so in a way which SB 100 did not, by the way. It had no off-ramps for a recession. It had no safeguards for your pocketbooks. And I wanted that in there. And had that been in there, I would have gladly supported that bill.
Thank you. I have been asked to remind you, the audience, to please refrain from clapping during this part of the program. I feel like I'm being a teacher, but I know you will comply. Thank you. You'll have a chance at the end to clap. And then also, I've been asked, in the essence of time, we better stick with our original plan of 2 minutes each. I know these are topics of interest, but in the interest of time, 2 minutes for each of you for each question. Thank you. Okay. We will begin this question with Mr. Ostrander. What effects on public safety do you think sanctuary cities and relaxing the bail requirements will have? What effects on public safety do you think sanctuary cities and relaxing bail requirements will have?
I'm happy to go first. I did go first in the last one, so if you want me to, I'll continue to go first, but that was the order the last time, so it's up to you.
No, we said that we would alternate.
Yeah, I went first in that last question. That's why I'm asking. I'm just trying to be fair.
I think that's right. Yeah. So, what effects do I think sanctuary city? I'm going to go ahead and assume that the question refers to sanctuary state, which was SB 54, incredibly controversial, hotly debated bill in 2017, and bail, the relaxing of bail requirements. What SB 10 did, which was voted on late August, rushed to the floor. 3 days of a brand new rewritten bill. They didn't put through any policy committees. It didn't relax bail requirements. It eliminated the bail system entirely in favor of a pretrial detention system where essentially county bureaucrats are going to run people through some scoring algorithm or something and try to determine whether they're a threat to public safety. There's two major problems with that. From a constitutional perspective, the ACLU and the NAACP, who were pushing the drive to the bail elimination to SB 10, they were behind that measure, actually reversed course, and the final bill that I voted on and voted against, they came off and opposed that bill. Let me say that again. The ACLU and NAACP opposed the bail bill SB 10 because they believe, and I think they're right, that it's unconstitutional. Because you're empowering a bureaucracy to hold somebody who's never been convicted of a crime. This is a pretrial detention without the possibility of bail. And I think personally that probably violates the 8th Amendment. That's the problem at the top end. At the bottom end, you're releasing people back into the streets with no possibility, no assurance that they come back for their court date. And I think you're going to see a spike in crime because of that. I work in the system. I've done it on both sides, prosecution and defense. New Jersey tried this, by the way. The failure to appear rate in court was so high they stopped tracking it. It was that bad. So you're going to have a lot of folks that are out of custody, out doing whatever they're going to do. And I think that's a big problem. Sanctuary state, I'll put it very simply, I think it's a misguided strategy. I think that if you want public safety, you need cooperation and coordination between federal government and local government, and sanctuary state severs that link and tells your local sheriff you cannot tell ICE that somebody's in custody, even for serious things in some cases. I think it's be bad for public safety.
Thank you, Mr. Cunningham. Mr. Ostrander?
Thank you. I want to say, first of all, the original SB 10 bill was a very good bill. And let's talk about the reasons why bail reform is necessary. We are one of only 2 countries in the world that have a money bail system, okay, first of all. Secondly, 62% of our jail population is incarcerated solely because they don't have the money to pay bail. That's a 2-tiered legal system in this country. If you have money, you get out. If you don't have money, you rot in jail until the legal system can get to you, which could be months. And too often we're seeing people plead guilty for things that they did not do or may not have done simply to get out of jail. That's costing taxpayers $5 million a day to house all these people. The second thing is very important is I would think as an attorney, Mr. Cunningham would be more concerned about the fact that it's institutionalized racism. People of color pay 3 times as much bail as he or I would if we were in jail and accused of the same crimes. SB 10, the version that got passed, is not the same bill that I wanted, and I agree with him that ACLU turned on that bill, as did the Human Rights Watch as well, who was one of the original people that were pursuing that bill. What it did, and the reason they don't like it, is because it put too much emphasis on the judge himself. And even though we have an Eighth Amendment constitutional right for bail, except in cases where crime was violent or the community is threatened, in which case they have no right to get out of jail if that is deemed that they're a public safety hazard. It does not increase crime or problems. In the studies that I've read in Washington, D.C., that is actually said the same percentage of people return to court as those with bail systems, 88% of the time. And in the state of Alaska, which is not what you would call a progressive bastion of people, they reformed their bail system and reduced their jail populations by 13%. 13%. That saved $384 million out of their state budget. We could be doing the same thing and using that money for much better purposes like education. Moreover, it's really important to understand, besides that costing us $5 million a day, what's happening to those people who are sitting in jail? Are they paying their rents, or their mortgages, or their car payments? Are they showing up for work and contributing to the tax base? Are they taking care of their children? Are they able to go to school? So not only is there an institutionalized racism that affects people of color much, much more significantly, there's a two-tiered legal system where poor people can't get out of jail. And then on top of that, it costs us as taxpayers a lot of money, and it doesn't allow them to actually aid in their own defense or pay taxes.
Thank you. Our timer does hold up a card when 30 seconds is remaining and then when time has been called. So that hopefully helps you in your responses. The next question on the topic is military-style assault rifles. And Mr. Ostrander, we ask you to begin. What is your view on military-style assault rifles being available to the general public?
Well, I just would like to finish from one question before about the sanctuary status, and I agree with the sanctuary status. Actually, immigrants commit less crimes than the general population do. And they do incredibly important work that adds to our economy. Secondly, on the issue of assault weapons, there's a lot of people that like to parse what assault weapons mean. I've worked in Africa with cheetahs and lions and black rhinos. I've worked on a farm most of my entire life. I have never, ever had needs for an assault weapon. To me, the reasons that people have assault weapon are vanity. It is not about protecting you from the federal government. You have much more enemies in our corporations that are running our political system and polluting the food that we have and polluting the water and polluting the air than we're ever going to have facing a rogue federal government. So I don't see that there's this need for assault weapons. And to be honest with you, most of our beliefs, whether you're progressive or conservative on this issue, we align. We've already agreed we don't deserve tanks, bazookas, even nunchucks, machetes, even switchblades. We all have recognized that they can cause harm and damage to a community. So why is it that we would allow somebody to put a clip into a gun that fires off around a second and kill 56 people, or I can't even remember how many people that was in Las Vegas. I think you were there actually in Vegas, weren't you, Mr. Cunningham? Terrible, terrible tragedy. There's no reason for that. And you, with your little assault weapon, is not somehow going to keep the government at bay if the government wants to come after you. It's such a silly argument to me, especially when there's so many more pressing needs. Now, California does have a ban on assault weapons, but they have a limited ability for some people to acquire them who are gun shop owners and some people who've had them in the past. But people who have guns are 22 more times more likely to die of violence from a firearm than those who don't. I, for one, do not believe that children in school should have to go to school and be afraid.
Yeah, so with the term military-style assault rifle, if that means what I think it means, what my conception of that is that we're talking about fully automatic weapons, then no, I don't think people need fully automatic weapons. The federal law has prohibited fully automatic weapons since 1986. California law has prohibited that for a long time as well. I mean, those are already illegal under California law. Certain modifiers like bump stock, like what that maniac used in Las Vegas to commit atrocious carnage, that simulate or modify a semi-automatic and get it to fire like an automatic, I think those should be illegal too. In fact, I voted to ban bump stocks and to clarify the ban so it was a little stronger just a couple weeks ago. I think if you want to reduce gun violence, I'll broaden the question out a little bit. There's two components to an effective strategy. The first is people that are mentally ill, that have been taken in, for example, on a 5150 involuntary hold for a mental health problem more than one time in a year. I don't think they should be able to possess firearms for a period of time. I voted on a bill to do that this year. Secondly, I think you need to go out and find folks that cannot legally possess firearms because of criminal convictions, mostly predominantly felons and some misdemeanors who have convictions for a crime of violence, and make sure that they do not possess firearms. There's a database that the California DOJ maintains called the APPS database, APPS. In that database, there are roughly 13,000 folks in California who cannot legally possess firearms, and we have no idea whether they have them or not. So if you want do something positive and proactive for gun safety, do those two things first. Make sure the mentally ill aren't getting guns, and make sure that people that cannot have them because they're felons or have committed crimes of violence do not have them. Once we've done that and taken care of that, I think we can talk about other forms of what we might need to do legally.
Thank you. The next question addresses the cannabis industry. We will begin with you, Mr. Cunningham. Please tell us your opinion of the cannabis industry in our towns, the pros and the cons. What are the pros and cons of the cannabis industry in our towns?
So Prop 64 passed. I think my concern with Prop 64 initially was two things. One is we don't currently, and I'm speaking from my experience in the criminal justice system, handling a lot of DUI cases of all forms. We don't currently, I think, have the infrastructure in place to have a reliable roadside test and a test that's admissible in court for whether somebody's under the influence of THC for driving. So I was concerned that we're leaping a little bit early in that respect, because states like Colorado and Washington that have legalized marijuana for recreational use already had those tests in place and already had a limit for how much you can have in your blood and drive. The other issue, I think, is it always comes down in this stuff to keeping things away from kids who have developing brains, and I didn't think Prop 64 had enough. I don't think there was enough in there to keep this from being marketed to our children. So, but look, it passed, and I think it's an industry that has tremendous economic value and potential. There is no question about that. I think, you know, the voters have spoken on it, and I think the smartest thing we could do from a policy standpoint is make sure that we're doing it intelligently, and I would say intelligently means those two things. Are our roads being kept safe so people can drive around without being in fear of other folks that are driving while high? And are we making sure that our kids are not having this marketed to them? I think if we can make those two things work, then we have a good chance of enjoying the economic benefits of what could be a tremendous industry. And by the way, medicinal cannabis has tremendous health benefits in some respects. I mean, I've had personal friends that have had oils that have helped their kids that have had seizure problems. So I think you can't ignore that in looking at the pros and cons. But again, it's road safety, and it's making sure that our children are not being marketed to.
Well, I agree with Mr. Cunningham that we always have to concern ourselves with the safety of an individual or of those around them that are using some type of substance that may alter, in some capacity, their ability to function. But unfortunately, this country has had this hypocrisy of having alcohol for our entire history. And every medical doctor will tell you that alcohol is far more dangerous than is pot. And it also has more personal medical consequences to that, especially if somebody were to use it and drive. They actually lose operating function in some cases. And so the only issue that I want to take with Mr. Cunningham on this point is that he voted against protecting legal cannabis users from federal agents. I'm sorry, Jeff Sessions is a wacko. I do not believe that marijuana is a gateway drug into heroin or something else. So I'm not sure why, if you can support 64, if you can support the idea that people can use marijuana medically, why you would turn around and vote for a bill that says it's okay, or not vote for it, but vote against a bill that prohibits the federal government from getting into our business as a state. I don't quite understand that. So from my point of view, medical marijuana and marijuana recreationally has been a boon for Colorado's economy and some of the other states. Even in Grover Beach, where they have a couple dispensaries now, in the first 3 months produced $20,000 worth of tax revenue that can be used for all kinds of things. So it's very important. And I would like to add to that, we still have this horrible policy where we can't let farmers grow hemp. Hemp. The United States Constitution was written on hemp paper, right? It was used in our sailing ships, on ropes, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It would be a really viable crop in this area that we could use that is far more efficient producer of fiber than forests are, or large grasses, because essentially it is a grass, but it has an incredibly important role that it could play in our environment and in our economy, and we need to get past this old idea that it's some horrible 1960s drug film thing.
Thank you. The next question addresses the size of the area that you represent. The 35th Assembly District is very large, from San Luis Obispo to Monterey County line, east to Cuyama, and south to Lompoc. So the question is, how will you work with the Lompoc community on areas of concern, such as funding for the homeless transition programs? How will you work with the Lompoc community on areas of concern, such as funding for the homeless transition programs? Mr. Ostrander?
Thank you. By show of hands, can I see how many people are here from Lompoc? Look at that. That's your answer right there. I go down and I visit these people and I talk to them and I see what their needs are. It is our job to represent a district that is nearly 150 miles long, with 470,000 constituents and over 240,000 voters. And each community is different. It has different needs. And it's important for me to make sure that I'm getting into those communities and understanding their needs, because the needs in Lompoc are not the same needs that are in Santa Maria, are not the same needs that are in San Luis Obispo, are not the same needs in Cambria or in Paso Robles. It's our responsibility to get out there, not simply put up ranch signs and pretend like you're part of that neighborhood or part of that community. I'm very proud that about 15 or 20 people from Lompoc have come up here today to support my candidacy. And I really appreciate that they're get out and willing to walk and make phone calls and so forth. And I want to address their issues. I want to hear what they have to say and use the power of the assembly to represent them. So I think it's a question of energy sometimes, because everybody wants your attention. There's so many needs, but that's part of the job.
Yeah, it is a big district. It's a fascinating and diverse district. I've driven every corner of it, and it's the best district in the country. We've got 2 prisons, a state hospital, a nuclear power plant, an Air Force base, 2 National Guard bases. I think the Lompoc community is a wonderful place. I get down there as much as I possibly can. This year when I'm in session in Sacramento, I have staff there as much as I can. We try to maintain as active of a presence in every single community as possible. In terms of specific items of helping the Lompoc community, I carried a bill this year that would allow the Lompoc Community Healthcare District to enter into a joint powers authority with Cottage Hospital to try to get some primary care health professionals into the area, because the Marion's a long ways away, Cottage is a long ways away, and it's a really underserved region with healthcare. So we're carrying this bill to try to get a public-private partnership so we can have the healthcare district and Cottage Hospital work together under existing legal structures. Amazingly enough, that takes a bill to do. News to me, but the things you learn first, your first year on the job. And when they brought it to me, I said, that's fantastic. We're going to do it. Hopefully I can report by September 30th that Governor Brown signed that bill, because I think it'll be a great thing for the community. I think we've got a very diverse, wonderful community with a ton of individual needs. There's certain things we all do share and we all have in common. And one of those things is the need for an affordable lifestyle, for housing that's affordable, for gas that's affordable, for food that's affordable. And we need to be proactive and think about how, with the closure of Diablo Canyon coming around the corner midway through the next decade, how we're going to replace those jobs. And I think a lot of the stuff that my opponent talks about that sounds great is also very expensive. And I'm telling you, when you increase taxes on small business, you're putting folks that are already under a pretty big burden into a bind. And I don't think that's the way we're going to grow the jobs we need for the next generation.
Thank you. The next question, Mr. Cunningham, we will begin with you. You stated earlier that there was no science behind SB 100. Please explain your view of climate change. What scientific information would have caused you to vote for SB 100?
Yeah, by my phrase that there was no science behind SB 100 was there was no study or data showing that the targets that that bill put into law, in terms of you have to have X% of the entire energy portfolio of California has to be as defined renewable, by a certain year, and then you have to have 100% by 2040 or 2045, I believe. There was no science showing that that could be done in a way that was not economically disruptive or extremely costly for people to pay electricity bills. We've already got a lot of pulls on people's pocketbooks, and there wasn't any study that said that could feasibly be accomplished without jacking electricity prices through the roof potentially in the out year, especially when you're really stretching to try to get that last 10% that's incredibly costly. They also never took into account the impact that closing Diablo Canyon was going to have on that. We lose 10% of our energy, which is clean energy, carbon-free, the largest carbon-free energy generation in the state. We lose that overnight in 2025 when Diablo Canyon closes down. That wasn't taken into account in any way in SB 100. Climate change is happening. I have a degree in physics. I have no problem with the science behind that. I do think that you need to be intelligent and also look at the economics in terms of how you approach it. I mean, one of the reasons I was persuaded to cross the aisle and support the cap and trade extension, among other things, was I thought that was the most cost-effective, efficient way to reach those goals. And I think that that program had been shown to have worked already. It was working okay, and extending it made a lot of sense to me. SB 100 just simply didn't have that kind of robust data behind it. And I asked a lot of those questions too. And you know, what happens when we lose nuclear? How does that affect this? And people really just hadn't given that much consideration. So I think it's going to drive up electricity costs, and I think we could have done it in a different way.
There's so many parts to this question and to Mr. Cunningham's response that I wish I could address. But I'm going to just talk to you philosophically for a second. Well, no, I won't. For 1 second, I would just want to say that 30 years from now is a long time. It's hard for anybody to see what we're going to do. I think that we as a people are facile enough to recognize that by 2040, if we're not on track, that we may need to take some changes. But I'm pretty confident that when John F. Kennedy stood on the stage and said, "We are not going to the moon because it's easy," he said, "We're going because it's hard." Forcing ourselves off of fossil fuels is also hard. Maybe that means that we pay a little tax. Maybe it does. Maybe it means we pay a little bit more electricity. Although the indications are renewable energies are going lower and lower, which is why Diablo Canyon said they would close, because it wasn't affordable. And I take exception to you, sir, when you say that Diablo Canyon is clean energy. I know people like to talk about the fact that it is carbon-free, but contaminated nuclear rods are not environmentally friendly. From my point of view, our government has always had some ambition to improve our lives. We saw it in the making of our Declaration of Independence. We saw it in Manifest Destiny. I know we hurt a lot of indigenous peoples, but we had ambitions. We saw it with Lincoln's land-grant university system because we needed to spread education. We saw it in World War I and World War II, where we're going to help the world find a democracy. We saw it with the GI Bill, educating people. We saw this with the space program and with our freeway system. Sometimes we need to work collectively towards the big ideas. Sometimes they're going to cost us a little bit of money. I'm okay with that. I'm sick and tired of hearing people talk about taxes as the litmus test for whether or not it's a good idea. I recognize that economic burden is always a part of this discussion, and I'm happy to have that discussion. But I also think it's important that we do need to make some sacrifices sometimes to deal with the climate that is changing, from wildfires that are raging, from water that's dirty, from the air that's dirty. So sometimes we have to dream, and that's what I want to do.
Thank you. We have time for one last question. The topic of this question is desalination. We will begin with you, Mr. Ostrander. Is desalination the best way to increase our water supply? Is desalination the best way to increase our water supply?
The short answer is no. Everybody likes to think that this ocean out there, which comprises, what, 90% of the Earth's surface, or 70%, I forget what the percentage is just this big pool of water that we can drink from. Americans and human beings as a whole never like to think of that's enough or restraint, or we just need more. We need more. We need more. And so we think, well, we'll just stick a straw in the ocean. That's very expensive water. First of all, just acknowledging Mr. Cunningham's concern environmentally, that's very expensive water. It is more affordable to desalinate brackish water, and there has been a recent project where the Coastal Commission allowed for them to put in a pipe in brackish water to clean that. But what do you do with all those salts? How do you compensate or mitigate the environmental damage pulling stuff out of the ocean? And if we actually look at the issue, how many of you know that 80% of the water we use in this district goes to agriculture? It's not for our consumption, it's for growing food. And unfortunately, when we have sprinklers just flying off in the air and then running off into our streams and polluting also Flaco Lake, the most heavily polluted body of DDT in the entire state, we need to rethink our relationship to water, and we can do that. There are two programs that we're doing in the state right now, the Healthy Soils Initiative and the SWEET program. The SWEET program is specifically geared towards water. The Healthy Soils program is helping farmers to understand new technologies to approach their farming. Do you know that if we increased organic matter by 1% in our soils, we would save 16,000 gallons of water per acre? If we increase the amount of carbon in our soils, and I told you earlier, our soils are depleted of carbon, we would hold more water so that our water doesn't hit these fields and then run off and into our streams. We're losing 4 tons of topsoil per person on the planet through erosion. And because the way we're farming is part of that. Our Healthy Soils Initiative and the SWEET programs are giving grant money in this district to the tune of about $7 million and 80 different farmers that are giving them grants up to $150,000 to help them put in sensitive water devices to limit the amount of water they're using. Excuse me, thank you.
Is it the best, is desalination the best way? I don't know. I mean, it's part of, I'm kind of an all of the above strategy guy when it comes to increasing water supply. 80% I think of that water for ag use sounds about right, but you know what? It's the mainstay of our Central Coast economy. I mean, it's one of the top components of the California economy, and we grow the nation's food here in California. So I'd submit to you that's a pretty good use for it. I mean, you know, so is showering and things of that sort. It's important to have water for human use. It's important for agricultural use. We've got to be smart. We've got to recycle. We've got to conserve. We've got to build wastewater treatment plants. But I think desalination has a lot of potential. The country of Israel is basically a desert, but they're on an ocean. They get all of their water from desalination. They export water, actually. I mean, this is the arid country next to an ocean. They've been doing it for years, and they've brought the cost way down, and the cost for the electricity that it takes to run desalination plants way down over time. He talks about dreaming big. Hey, that technology's got tremendous potential. John F. Kennedy, I get in my JFK quote too, said that if we could figure out desalination, it would be one of the greatest discoveries, technological achievements of all of mankind. You know, water is an essential thing for life, but desalination it holds the potential of being the only way you can make more of it. So I think it's something we need to look at, and like I mentioned earlier, the Planet Diablo has tremendous potential for repurposing for local use. On the last thing, and I'll cover this I think in my closing because I'm almost out of time, but on the issue of dreaming big, I'm all for it, but you also need to acknowledge economic realities. People dream big in high-speed rail. You know what we've got? We've got a system that we don't have the money for, that the feds have pulled out of the funding. There's no private investment in it. The cost went from $45 billion to estimated $78 billion up to $100 billion. We're left holding the bag, and it's not high speed. It's not on time, and I don't know that we're ever going to see it. And at some point, you have to acknowledge economic reality.
Thank you. Time goes by quickly. Thank you very much for answering those questions. Thank you to the audience for submitting them. We begin our last part of this evening's format, and that is the conclusion where we hear from each of the candidates to present a concluding statement. You have 2 minutes, sorry, and we will begin with you, Mr. Ostrander, first. Thank you.
First of all, I want to say thank you to Mr. Cunningham for coming and joining us here today. I appreciate that. I know you're very busy and you're away from your family a lot, so I really appreciate that you're giving us the courtesy of an opportunity to discuss our issues. Because at the end of the day, I do have a lot of respect for you. I just have a challenge to accept some of your some of your ideas. And I think that's what this political process is all about, and why I'm so glad to see a full room of people here in attendance. I talk about 4 things. I believe they're all nonpartisan. I know that Mr. Cunningham and I can sit down and find at least 5 things that we completely agree on. But the hyperpartisanship that we have in our country today is debilitating. It's dysfunctional. It's not working. Part of the reason for that, and this is going back to the subject that I broached at the very beginning of this, is campaign finance reform. It's unfair to the rest of us that corporations have the ability to influence our elections. Do you know that in 2016, only 1.3% of all eligible voters donated to a campaign? And so what happens is that every election, we have to chase you harder and harder and harder to find the money to run for office. In the federal government, 70% of representatives' time is spent on the phone asking for donations. And the more we ask you for money, the more you run away, like horses in a pasture. Anybody try to chase a horse in a pasture, it just runs, and you can't catch it. And that's the race that we're in right now, trying to raise money. Conveniently, corporations step into the breach. And again, I don't fault Mr. Cunningham for this, but 91.5% of his money is coming from corporations and political action committees. So when you're driving down the road and you look and you see all those signs, realize that some of those are being paid by cigarette companies and fossil fuel companies and chemical companies, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And what you'll see, okay, I'm out of time, but I'd love to talk to you about this more. My material's over there on the table, and you can have my cell phone numbers there. Call me and we can chat. I'd love to talk to you. I don't care what persuasion you are.
Thank you. In 2016, I don't have the exact data for you, but I just know for the record I had over 800 individual donors from our district, and I'm proud of that. So we can talk about campaign finance reform. I voted for a lot of bills to make our system more transparent already. I support a lot of those measures as well. So, but what I want to focus on in my concluding remarks is what I have attempted to do in the last 2 years and what I'm offering to you for the next 2 should the voters send me back. Look, he's right about one thing for sure. We are in an era of hyperpartisanship. You need leaders that are willing to reach across the aisle, to look at problems, to take a problem-solving approach to public policy. That is what I have done. I've done it with career technical education, supporting our kids and our economy. I've done it fighting human trafficking, which I think is just a complete evil. And we need to reach across the aisle and come up with better strategies to fight that. I've done it for public safety, and I come at that from a balanced viewpoint. I've done both sides in criminal law. When I talk about bail, I've lived that system. I've made those arguments for people to save their jobs. So that one is personal. When I talk about sanctuary state in jeopardizing all of our safety potentially because of the way that bill's implemented, I know what I'm talking about. I have been in that system. I've worked in it every day. So I will always, always put the Central Coast first and be an independent voice. We are going to do the right thing to support our small business. We are going to intelligently prepare for the post-Diablo future and economy. We're going to have an energy policy that I think rows in the right direction in terms of alternative energy sources, but does it in an economically viable way. And I am also proud that I had never, in my time in office, yet voted for a tax increase. We can do all these things within the existing massive budget of the state of California. We've been able to solve problems already. I'm going to continue to offer that to you. And I don't care who you are, what president you are, what governor you are, or what party you're from. If you want to put the Central Coast first and do all the things that I want to do, I will work with you every day. Thank you.
Well, as you can see, this concludes the formal part of our program tonight. Thank yous are in order. First of all, to you, the candidates, thank you for your willingness to share your knowledge and ideas to educate and inform the community. That is certainly one of the goals of the League of Women Voters. And thank you for agreeing to the format. We would like to thank our co-sponsors, the Santa Maria Times, the Fund of Santa Barbara, the Fund for Santa Barbara, the Area Agency on Aging for Santa Barbara and San Luis counties, the NAACP, the Santa Maria Valley Chamber of Commerce, and the Lompoc Valley Chamber of Commerce.